Hello, welcome to a special election edition of Represent NYC, presented by Manhattan Neighborhood Network in partnership with the League of Women Voters of the City of New York. I'm Kate Doran of the League of Women Voters of the City of New York. Ahead of New York's September 9th Democratic primary, we're sitting down with the candidates running in the state assembly and assembly races to talk about their qualifications, legislative ideas, and the key issues faced by residents of Manhattan. Today we welcome Kelley Boyd, one of the Democratic candidates who is running to represent New York State's 71st Assembly District, which encompasses West Harlem, Washington Heights, and Inwood. Incumbent Herman Denny Farrell was invited to participate but was unable to attend. Thank you for being here, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we're going to have a conversation. I've prepared some questions. In your opinion, what is the role of a New York State Assembly member?
You know, I think the role of an assembly member, as really any elected official, is to really deliver to the citizens the mechanism by which they can solve problems, make change in the community. And I feel like that's what's gone missing, if you will, in terms of how government has changed, in that, you know, politicians, it's become more political rather than more government service. And so an assembly member, my assembly administration, is really all about doing the work on the ground in the district to help people move the whole community forward. And it has to be a collective effort. I say to people all the time when I'm out on the campaign trail, you know, voting for me is when the work begins, not when the work ends. And I think that that's a very different mindset than the way that most people that run for office think.
Mm-hmm. All right. Why are you uniquely qualified to represent District 71?
Wow, that's a great question. My motivation, the root of why it is that I'm running, is all about a housing claim that I filed in 2009. And I filed that claim after going to a town hall meeting and getting some information from my local elected officials saying, here's what you need to do, here's what you need to do. And so I would do that, and then I would go back to those offices, and then they'd say, now here's what you need to do. And then they kept telling me the same thing over and over again, and I was really left on my own. My only option at that point was to go and hire a $350, $400 an hour attorney, which I couldn't afford. So I represented myself all the way through this process, which ended up lasting more than 5 years, and finally last year I won at the appellate division, which was amazing, really exciting. But man, it was so hard fought. And then, of course, the other side appealed. We went to the Court of Appeals in Albany, I mean the top court in the state, and I lost. And so what that really meant to me, and I had already decided to run for office at that time, and I was just, I mean, I was devastated. Devastated.
How does that experience translate into representing your constituents?
So I looked in the mirror. I took a long, hard look in the mirror, because things are going to be very hard from that point on, being a winner and then not being the winner, right? And I decided that if that happened to me after all the effort and all the time and all the hard work I put into it, what was happening to everybody else? What was happening to people that didn't have that time, that didn't have the wherewithal to do the work? And that was just sobering, and I thought, wow. And as I started doing the research, 30,000 people were evicted from their homes in Manhattan last year. I'm going to be one of them this year, probably. But that to say, though, what's happening to everyone, and why isn't someone doing something about it? And I decided that someone's me. I'm going to do something about it.
All right. What are the legislative priorities for your particular district, and how do you plan to address them?
You know, after really looking at the whole of the way that government works, legislative priorities certainly are around housing, and there's lots of existing legislation by Liz Kruger and Keith Wright and other people that's been pending for years, quite honestly, Kate. So I don't need to make new legislation. I need to sign on and support and help people move legislation through, at least in the housing area. I'm a big supporter of campaign finance reform, so that's something that I think is super, super important. I don't know, obviously. I've not served in the Assembly. I've not served in the House, in the Senate. So I don't know exactly where I can be of value in that process, but I intend to sign on to support people who are already doing things. And if nobody's doing something, and say like Streets PAC, somebody like that needs some legislation going forward, I'm super excited to drive that.
Okay. Well, since you mentioned campaign finance reform, what changes, if any, to the campaign finance regulation and enforcement do you propose?
Well, I think that the city has done a great job of campaign finance. In fact, I think there's two places, Arizona and New York City, that have really done a good job. So I don't think that it would be very difficult to adapt what's happening in New York, statewide. One thing that I think kind of jumped out at me, that the difference between Arizona and New York, is that in other places, and even still here, it might be a better measure of constituent support or voter support for somebody to be a number of donors rather than an amount, because what I saw proposed, I think, was $200,000, that a candidate would have to raise $200,000.
You're referring to the number of donors as opposed to the amount of money donated per.
Right. I'm thinking that that's really much more representative of what the community wants, because if $200,000 is still a lot of money, right? And so if you have to raise 200 to get enough money, I'm not sure that's sending the signal that we want regular people to run for office.
Well, we seem to have come very close to getting some real campaign finance reform.
Yes.
Do you have any ideas of how to sort of push that over the finish line?
I think that we have to remove the barriers to that. I don't know that there just seems to be a lack of political will at the very top of the food chain. So as part of the whole ethical reform thing that the governor had put forward, to abandon those things, I mean, that's really what happened. They just abandoned them.
Right. Well, that's a great segue. How will you navigate the political landscape in Albany? The top of the food chain and others.
Yeah, I really see, again, I see my job as being on the ground in the district. The Assembly, and part of the reason I chose the Assembly is because I didn't want to have to spend all my time in Albany, maneuvering and trying to figure out how to get my name and get my things going forward.
Right.
It's not hard to get legislation passed in the Assembly, right? The hard part is in the Senate, and certainly I respect the fact that Mr. Jackson and Mr. Espaillat, are battling out for that race. That's not where I want to spend my time, and so to the extent that the reality is this is billed, as is the state Senate seat, as a part-time job, which is why other people have all this money coming in from other places. I look at it as a full-time, on-the-ground job here in the district. So to answer your question, I'm going to support the legislation that people put forward, and again, where it is that my constituents need legislation that nobody is putting forward, I'm going to write it and bring it forward and try. I was a salesperson for a long time. I mean, Fortune 1, Fortune 100. So I know how to get people on board and to find an and solution for things as opposed to an or solution. And I think I can, over time, I think that I'll be able to do that.
How much time would you spend in Albany as opposed to down in your district? Have you thought about that?
Well, the website says, on the job description, the website says it's between 62 and 65 days a year that that you're in session. Obviously, you need to be there a little bit more to work, with people. But I think that what we've seen in our district for the last 10 or better years is a person that has spent more than half of their time in Albany, and I don't see that in my future. I want to be in the district. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I feel very strongly about is having a mobile office in the district. That's one of the things that I think is super important. The district is...
Say more about that, a mobile office.
Yeah, the district is so diverse, and there are so many different kinds of needs, and it's so long and skinny and just so much... I think that we have to, as government, I think people have lost confidence in government largely because they can't see government at work. And I think that if we have a mobile office, then we can show up at the point of need of citizens. So if I have people coming into the office and complaining about, a rat problem or a predatory landlord or harassment or trash or, any of those things, how about we drive over there?
So what are you envisioning, like a SUV, a bus?
Well, I think a step van. I think
Oh,
a step
okay.
van, something that people
Okay.
could come into
That
if
would be
necessary.
accessible?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I mean, if you think in terms of you could, roll out an awning and put some chairs and a card table out
okay.
there and just serve people. It really doesn't need to be. People don't care what it looks like. They care what happens. They care what the result is. And I
Right.
think that if we let go of all the things that we think, I mean, I've heard actually from other people, you have to look you have to dress a certain way in this part of the district, and you have to dress a different way because it's what people expect. You know what? I think people expect for the work to get done.
Right,
And
right.
that's not happening.
And they may like a little authenticity.
Well, they'll get that with me, that's for sure.
Okay. Redistricting. The League of Women Voters has been working on this for maybe 50 years. Do you support the redistricting proposal that will appear on the ballot in November?
I do support it because I think just kind of like the Affordable Care Act, I took issue with some of the things. I think any movement forward is something we want to glom onto.
Right.
I'm not sure I love the language because the language says that it's an independent, and it really doesn't feel very independent because legislators are still, appointing people, and then the group of people, the 8, appoint 2 more. And so I think it's really more bipartisan, and I think
Right.
that's the intention. And I think that's good. So that's a step forward. So let's do that. But then as we go forward, let me tell you, you and I both know that where the holes are will quickly be found out by our long-reigning politicians and be
Right.
exploited, and it'll be our job to close them up.
Right, but it's a constitutional amendment.
And we'll just have to keep working on it. But look, something is better than nothing. And if you even look at my district, we were just talking about that.
Right.
I go from south of Dykeman all the way through the park, all the way down to 140th, but then I zigzag up to 145th. Then I go up and catch 7 NYCHA properties over here, and then I go back up. I don't have the Jumal Mansion, but I have everything on either side. It's crazy.
Right, right. Inwood, Washington Heights,
See, I really
West
don't
Harlem.
have much of Inwood. I really only have one building, 1825 Riverside.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't have Inwood anymore. It used to be, but before the redistricting, there was quite a bit. It was east and west of Broadway, even though there was this sliver in the middle that went down by Edgecombe. But with the redistricting, I have what used to be District 7, City Council District 7.
Right.
I have that, and then I come down into pretty much river to river from 165th to 145th, and then a couple of errant
right.
jags.
Do you think voters know much about this, the topic of redistricting? And if they don't, how do we get them interested so that they'll have an opinion, so that they'll want to turn that ballot over and vote one way
I
or-
think that it's our job as local elected officials. I think it's our job, and certainly you guys have been doing the job. League of Women Voters has really been, when you call Board of Elections, they direct people to your website. So, I mean, you've been doing the job for a long time. I think that really we have to get back to a level of civic engagement. That's really my grand vision. That's my grand vision. So
Right.
my measure of success, this is the big deal. My measure of success, and I'm limiting myself to 8 years because I think that if I do my job right, in 8 years' time, I will have found 4, 5, 8 people throughout my district, regular people, community leaders, people that care about the district that will rise up to take my place and continue on evolving the district. My grand vision, the measure of my success, is in civic engagement. And that means the number of people registered to vote in my district and voter turnout. I'm going to have the highest voter turnout in this whole city. That's winning for me.
That's commendable.
That's winning for me.
Right, that's commendable. I did notice that in your responses that you gave to our Vote 411 voter guide that you wrote, good governance depends on an engaged electorate. So how do you develop this engaged electorate? You've mentioned your step van, your mobile office.
And I don't know if it's a step van, so don't
Well,
hold me to that.
okay,
but
okay,
whatever
possibly.
it is, it's
Your
getting out
mobile
into
office, right?
into the district. Well, I mean, it's that because I think then people see government at work and they know that you're there for them and that you're listening, that you're trying to do the job. But it's also like running an efficient office. When people come in, and I've seen this so much, because I volunteered in offices. I've worked on one campaign, 2 campaigns before, just to see what happens. And I got to tell you, look, coming into the office and the process that has to happen to capture the information to be able to surface up what it is that a person really needs. Very often I see constituents come into an office and they tell that office what they want to have happen. Well, let me tell you, that's not the best way to get things done, because if you one-off it every time, and I say, well, what do you want, Kate? Well, no, how about I say, so Kate, I hear you saying this is your problem. Here's how we solve that problem. Here's the steps we go through, and here's the process that we go through. Now, we have staff to support you through that process. So here's what I'm going to need from you. Then here's what we're going to do. All I ever hear when I go into here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to do. Well, how about what are you supposed to do?
Right.
You know,
right.
how
So
about you
think
do
that,
it?
You think that turns off the voter, the constituent? They're thinking, I'm paying taxes. Why isn't this individual suggesting what they're going to do for me?
Well, yeah, but again, in all fairness to local electeds, they do it wrong. They do it wrong. And so they start off with, what do you want me to do, constituent? And then they go do that. That's not going to solve the problem, because that's a one-off solution. So if instead they would have processes that are guaranteed to have an outcome, whatever that outcome is, you have to let go of that. Because say somebody comes in and they want immigration status for some cousins that came over because they lost their parents in Guatemala or Dominican, wherever. You come in and you say that, and it's like, okay, well, I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but here's the process we need to go through to find out what can happen. Right? I'm not going to make a promise on the outcome. I'll make a promise on the process.
Okay.
And having a result. And I think we just go on and on.
Fair enough. You also mentioned on our Vote 411 voter guide a goal to streamline government services. So how would you do that?
Well, it really goes back to what I was just talking about. When you come in, we will have identified processes for the traditional standard things that happen. We all know that we have tremendous housing problems. We have immigration problems. We have jobs, education problems. We have trash problems. I mean, there's certain things that we know for sure. And I think that what happened to me anyway, when I was looking for support for my issues, I went to every single government. That's right, my housing issue. I went to every single government office, and never once was I directed to go to a place and a person that could actually solve my problem. They just sat there politely listening to me and said, well, we'll write a letter. Or, that wasn't going to help me. That wasn't going to help me. I needed somebody to help me, not write a letter.
Okay. We're going to shift topics for a minute. What is your position on the Women's Equality Act?
Oh, the Women's Equality Act?
Yes, the one that didn't make it across the finish line either.
Well, I mean, I actually went to Albany to lobby for that. I think that what's interesting is that there's this, what was interesting was learning about why it didn't make it, why the Assembly passed it all, in totality, and then the Senate broke it apart. And that was really the big deal. And because I didn't really understand, the Senate was touting, okay, well, we've done all this, but we held back on this one provision. And so I don't know whether or not the benefit is, sometimes, Kate, it's not about being right, it's about getting what you want. And in life, I think that it's helpful to think about, do I need to be right and have this pristine, no, this is how it should be, or do I want to get what I want? And what I want is to move women's equality forward. How do we best do that? Is it okay to break it apart? So
you would be happy, perhaps, with the 9 points and not the 10th?
I don't think I would be happy with it, but
reproductive freedom,
right?
The 10th point.
Which is really, really important. But I mean, certainly, the points of stopping trafficking was helpful.
Right.
I mean, how long do you need to be right and let something like that go on? You know what I mean? It just seems like doing something about the things you can do something about is useful. Do I think that the right thing is to leave reproductive freedom hanging in the balance? No. Do I think the right thing is that New York is even way behind Roe v. Wade? I mean, why don't we just codify that language? I don't understand that, in all fairness, because I'm not in the business of that. I'm in the business of serving people at their point of need, and I'm fortunate that is my experience in life, is just getting things done. And so,
So constituent services is going to be a big part of what you're going to do.
Because that's what I can do. Look, we've got laws in place. We've got lots of laws. And that doesn't mean that justice is being done out there. Lots of laws.
Right.
Lots of people manipulating them, maneuvering around them. So what I really want to do is solve problems.
Right. All right. Segueing to elections. What election reforms would you support? For example, early voting, voting by mail, better ballot design, voter registration modernization?
Yes, 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 yes.
Yes to
yes
all,
to, yes
yes
to
to
all of
yes
them.
to all of them.
Yes to all of them.
Right,
I think also expanding portability. You know, making sure that when people move, I mean, because that's one of the things, you know, I spent a lot of time early in this campaign, if you will, just trying to get people registered to vote. Just saying, are you registered to vote? A lot of people in my district are new in the district. Right. And they haven't registered, but I still have, I gave out 4 voter registrations yesterday. They're not going to be able to vote for me or not going to be able to vote in the primary.
Right, a little too late.
But not too late for the general.
Correct, correct, right.
No matter who you're voting for.
The portability all comes under voter registration modernization, which the League very strongly supports. Early voting, some say, would be expensive, and others say that voting by mail, otherwise known as no-excuse absentee voting, would require a constitutional amendment. So, but better ballot design seems to be like a no-brainer.
It seems to be. Of course, I'm not an expert in these matters, and there are people that are, but in as much as there's an opportunity to learn more about how that, I mean, I'm a lean startup person, and so A/B testing on different messages, different different structures, different formats is something that I'm very accustomed to in terms of app development and that sort of thing. So it would make sense to do A/B testing on ballot design and figure out the one that is most conducive to voters being able to quickly discern what the question is and answer the question.
A/B, just for voters who don't know what that means, A/B testing, A/B.
A/B testing just means having a choice between two things and seeing which thing people are able to navigate better or to get better conversion.
This language comes from your experience as a technology person.
That's right, that's right. Okay. Conversion is the measure.
I'm going to ask a question that was asked of other candidates who sat in these chairs here. So, what steps would you propose at the state level regarding income inequality while maintaining an environment that encourages economic growth?
I think that's a super important question, particularly now. The most important thing that we can do is raise minimum wage. I think that is absolutely critical. I'm a subscriber to the adage that, you know, all ships rise. And the reality, you know, people argue that, well, if you raise minimum wage, then the prices of things go up. Seems like the price of things is going up anyway. So,
what do you think the minimum wage should be? What would you like to see it at?
I think honestly, I don't think that you can. At least, I think it has to have some relationship to the cost to live somewhere, and I've got some ideas of some other things too that I'll go on.
So
but
you don't,
at least
you don't
15.
Have a number
no,
in
15. I think $15. I think in New York City, certainly. So there may be some surcharge, there may be some other thing that you would do. So it's minimum wage, and I think strengthening collective bargaining, I think is really important, and kind of right-sizing collective bargaining. I think it did get out of hand at some point, but I think what we saw in Detroit and the way that kind of right-sized and balanced was really a good model. And then lastly, in terms of our city and, you know, my district, increasing Mitchell-Lama housing, which is different than 421A and different than inclusionary zoning, because if we don't have a place, I'm a big proponent, I've created this thing called area median wage as opposed to area median income, and I think that we have to have people who live in a neighborhood, who work in a neighborhood, be able to live there.
Right. All right. Well, it's very clear that there's a lot more that we could be talking about, and we could be saying more about every topic that we raised. But we've come to the end of our conversation, so now it's your opportunity to tell the voters of the 71st Assembly District, which is Inwood, Washington Heights, West Harlem, why they should come out on September 9th and vote for you.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate the opportunity. So I think the big thing to say to voters is that you really finally have a choice. You have a choice on the ballot of someone who brings to the table something very different in terms of government service, but not at all new and not at all experimental. The net is that I am a former technology executive. I worked in the 90s to build the infrastructure that is the internet. I know how those systems work. I'm not going to be sitting on the other side of the table being pitched to by a number of people about different services and solutions like a city time and not be able to ask the right questions about what it is we're really going to get at the end of that and how it works. I know how it works. We need people that know those words. So beyond that, to say that I don't have any experience, I'm a community board member. I was a vice chair of the first technology committee as a resident member. I'm on Parks and Public Safety. I think that I've learned a lot about the way local government works and what we can leverage in existing government operations like community boards, like school districts, to help engage people more. And then the last thing is that I'm a serial entrepreneur. I mean, I am not afraid to disrupt and innovate. I mean, one of the things that we say all the time is fail fast, and that's what I believe. I'm not going to stand there and say that I know the answer to everything, but I promise you I'm going to try to fix problems, and if I don't get it fixed, I'm going to scrap it and I'm going to start again.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Kelley Boyd, for joining us today. Remember, primary day is Tuesday, September 9th, and only registered voters enrolled in a party having a primary may vote on September 9th. For more information on New York City's 2014 elections, visit mnn.org. You can also access candidate and polling information on the League of Women Voters website, lwvnyc.org, or go to vote411.org for our voter guide. You can phone the League at 212-725-3541. I'm Kate Doran of the League of Women Voters for this special election edition of Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network.